Did you know that every day, the moment you wake up, every time you open your phone to browse social or consume mainstream media, your mind, your being, your very sense of reality is being attacked? Not so welcome to the fifth generation of warfare. In this episode, we will try to give a definition, elaborate a little on the history and evolution of propaganda and the modern context which affect us all by now. Starting off with some short definitions of the first four generations, second, coming to the theoretical definition of fifth generation warfare, with some modern examples employed by various private to state actors, to close off with some first solutions. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes on more examples unveiled, and especially for further basics episodes on how to see through, spot every kind of psyop, and learn how to immunize yourself, helping to keep your mind, decision making, and future plans clear. First generation warfare. Reference Handbook of First Generation Warfare. This one is pretty simple. It is what when we think of ancient warfare, when you for example take phalanx formations or line column tactics. Large armies clashing on open battlefields. This is the first true definition where states or groups fought each other. The second generation, over time, as technology then evolved and allowed to kill each other more efficiently, the second generation of warfare started to arise. Machine guns, more precise artillery, etc. come to play here, so for this generation, think World War I. Here the words modern warfare truly come into play, where technological advancements forced radical changes in doctrine and style of warfare, as we see unfolding on e.g. the Ukrainian battlefield these days by almost a weekly basis. Gone were the days where large armies advanced information over large open battlegrounds. Welcome to camo, dispersion, stormtrooper squads, and the trenches. In the interwar period, technology advanced further. Spy balloons and very basic double-decker planes became replaced by much more sophisticated measures of reconnaissance and attack, like the Messerschmitt Jäger and the flying fortresses of the Americans, while the maturing of the tank in combination with the further sophisticated artillery brought us into the age of combined arms warfare doctrines. The acceleration occurred quite rapidly, as for example just in the field of aviation. In just 9 years, this Bristol F-2 was replaced by the Spitfire. On the ground, similar developments took place, as the Bewegungskrieg, source the roots of Blitzkrieg by James's Coram maneuver warfare, broke the trench stalemates due to the former mentioned combined arms doctrines ever more coming to use. Rapid mobility, armored columns supported by mobile infantry, covered by following artillery, and overwatching sophisticated air force gave us World War II, and therefore the third generation of warfare. But during the closing days of the former, the nuclear bombs were developed and finally employed. This again was a development which forced to change the ways wars were being fought, leading to the era of stealth instead of force developments, but as well as proxy wars and precision-guided munitions to possibly avoid an all-out nuclear exchange. Which conditions, especially from the Russian side we discussed in a former episode, you can find in the description. Note, we are still in the third generation of warfare. And in regards of timeline, think Korea, Vietnam, Gulf and even the later Iraq War, as this era still encompasses the winning hearts and minds concept we have grown to know so well. The precision munition instead of carpet bombing and the stealth bombers might have changed the necessary sophistication of how in detail, yet it still didn't change too much since World War II regarding the end goals and strategies of the conflicts were actually being fought. Fourth generation. Source: Understanding Fourth Generation War by William A. Slint. The fourth generation of warfare can be defined by a single word: insurgency. This is where things can get political and the amateur historian can run into some problems regarding his research. As one of the first persons to write about this, William H. Slint especially stressed the Islamic-framed insurgencies in the Middle East. Quoting, "All over the world, state militaries find themselves fighting non-state opponents as such as Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Almost everywhere, the state is losing. Fourth generation war is also marked by a return to a world of cultures, not merely states in conflict." And please note that he wrote this in a regarding time frame. Now hold on, some might want to say, and for example quote Vietnam. Yet they would be wrong. Unbeknownst to many various movies and media gave the impression that Vietnam was primarily an insurgency, yet this is technically not correct. While of course many of the civilians whom lost friends and family joined the Viet Cong's ranks, the employment of guerrilla tactics on a wider scale does not negate the fact that it was a conventional army leading the charge and operations. Especially the air wars over Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia are very often overlooked, but they were so intensive that they laid the groundwork to the suppression of enemy air defense doctrine, as the North Vietnamese employed these heavily, which is why there are so many stories about captured pilots. It were therefore still conventional nation-states armies employing the third generation of warfare whom fought each other here. So to close out, the fourth generation of warfare is primarily defined by insurgency. Now, finally coming to the fifth generation, here also we run into problems of definition, bloodlines and semantics, as well as scholarly disagreements on this or that point, as some academics have even denied that fifth generation warfare even exists. This, as so far, according to Daniel H. Abbott's The Handbook of Fifth Generation Warfare, the development of the generations so far has been defined by the theory of sequential emergence, which is a fancy way of theorizing that the lessons from the first generation then lead to the tactics and technology and strategies of the second, and so on. Yet Abbott came up with a very convincing graph which illustrates that the generations maintain to exist at the same time. They do not replace, but rather build up on each other. So even if your current main objective might be to counter insurgency, you still could be employing second or third generation tactics have regarding conflicts occur simultaneously. This is now where the fifth generation warfare breaks the frame. Most experts seem to agree that the fifth generation does not follow this progressive model. Let's try to address some of the current theories on and define what fifth generation warfare actually is. According to William Lind, fifth gen is actually just a collection of tactics which should be accounted for, added to the third and fourth, which is why theoretically the fifth does not even exist as a separate field of warfare. Coming from the man who wrote the fourth, we now come to Daniel Abbott, whom states that the fifth generation is a war of information and perception, which it encompasses it quite nicely in my opinion, but still remains a little too broad. The US Air Force, on the other hand, 5th generation air combat, Major General Jeff Harrigan, Colonel Max Marusco, thinks that it's simply an extension of the air war, which is where the different generations of fighter jets come into play. Some of you might have already talked about this since the beginning of the video. They primarily saw it as a sensor-defined field and that the future planes will have certain better sensors or communication arrays, enabling to outperform the enemy technologically and tactically, like in the emergences of the first 3 generations. This is not really our area of concern, as it seems too much more concerned with the 5th generation of fighter aircraft, which it's important to note as this first coined the term 5th gen in military circles, which is why many strategists have been, might still be misled, that it is mostly a concern of technology and sensor, which it isn't. The People's Liberation Army of China actually figured this out quite early, as in a 1999 publishing titled Unrestricted Warfare by Colonels Qiao Ling and Wang Xiongxi. Especially with focus on a potential conflict of the West, they stated, "What we are referring to are not changes in the instruments of war, the technology of war, the modes of war, or the forms of war. What we are referring to is the function of warfare." As you see, this hints at a real evolutionary development, not a sequential progression like in the former generations. Which was picked up by the think tank 360 RSR in their work 5th Generation Warfare, The Brave New World, the changing shape of the 5th generation mission space, stating, "We are no longer fighting a defined adversary in a defined battle space for a defined period of time. Instead, the 5th generation mission space is a continuous global battle of narratives that will play out over both virtual and physical space and encompass a range of violent and non-violent actions and effects." Dr. Konstantinos Tetsos of the Mises Institute of Strategic Foresight of the German Army University Munich, in a study on scenarios of Russian influence until 2030, published in December 2024, defines 5th gen warfare as hybrid and teleological warfare, whereas the fourth is being defined as decentralization of force. The 5th generation then can be divided in physical hybrid and teleological warfare and psychological cognitive hybrid and teleological warfare, whereas the former encompasses measures like strategic corruption, cyber attacks and disinformation, which aims to disrupt or constantly having to reset the enemy's decision making, paired with the possibility of attacks on critical infrastructure with the goal to paralyze the physical ability of the enemy to wage war in preparation of a conventional war. While the latter, for example, especially emphasizes social media, information warfare, to step-by-step hack the enemy's OODA loop to weaken his psychological cognitive abilities to wage war and to prepare the overtaking of his reality, which Dr. Tetsos defines as the 6th generation of warfare, having hijacked the enemy's decision-making, enabling to enforce one's will on an opponent without having to resort to physical violence at all. The obvious grave problem now is that not only state actors can wage these latter generations of warfare. Anyone with enough influence, wealth, or networks can further strategic corruption to his benefit, while anyone able to pay for a bot farm and some savvy blackheads and influencers can alter many people's senses of reality. Quoting Lieutenant Colonel Stanton Core of the US Marine Corps, 5th generation warfare versus the non-state, the battlefield will be something strange. Cyberspace, or the Cleveland's water supply, or Wall Street's banking systems, or YouTube. The mission will be instilling fear, and it will succeed. Indeed. What we therefore should note is that this war is being forked in civilian domains as well, which raises further concerns and questions which many administrations try to tackle in different ways. The Kommando Operative Information of the German army, for example, is explicitly forbidden from waging its skills against their own populace. The employment of such tactics and expertise, as well as the capabilities to do so, are yet sadly far more widely spread as one could wish. Very often it is being broken down to that 5th generation warfare is one of propaganda and very littly about your very own mind, which is quite accurate. Which therefore is the right way to counter such new ways of war. Sharpen your weapons, which is primarily your brain and its capability to recognize and place such regarding tactics, strategies, and their narratives. Another twisted term to realize and memorize is that tactics of a certain generation and an end goal of strategy might be somewhat counterintuitive. As for example, psychological warfare aims to make one think a certain way, but is this the actual end goal? The actual end goal is to get a person to act a certain way. Actions are far more devastating than thoughts, and as these lead to actions, we ever more see a rise in tactics to influence the former to produce desirable outcomes in the latter. The actual end goal is to weaken the enemy's capabilities to resist, from making a country so divided it might fall into civil war, or to terrify its citizens so far that their psyche breaks, they become indecisive, and for example fall into depression, laziness, or drug abuse, which are all factors hindering an army's readiness or its recruiting potential. While obesity has long been identified as a significant hindering factor in recruiting potentials, the raging drug crisis in the Western world are even more severe. While the constantly dropping testosterone levels might not be too obvious, seem almost negligible, yet when it comes to actual physical prowess comparability, it very much isn't. To close out for today, let's gather a rough list of 5th generation warfare characteristics as it applies to civilian as well as military communities alike. First, mass cyber attacks, which are not attributable to an action or nation state. A kind of obvious one, but sadly, although it has much been spoken about, very little has been done to secure our critical infrastructures. Second, mass social engineering, which can be conducted by nation states even on their own citizens as well. Also maybe not too surprising, but as morals and norms shift, it becomes a much more powerful tool than in the past decades, not even mentioning modern technology's capabilities to enhance it. Something states, militaries as well as non-state actors have noticed and are utilizing quite effectively. Third, a lack of an us versus them nature. The conflict rather often seems to be spontaneous, as with cyber attacks, kinetic actions, if they occur, are less attributable when waged in a 5th generation warfare context, while social crises might be accelerated by non-identifiable actors operating under the mantle of goodwill for justice, from which the responsible actor benefits from resulting chaos. Never let a good crisis go to waste. You might see some actors strike back at another by attacking a seemingly unrelated third-party group. As Alan Bayerchen elaborates in Clausewitz, nonlinearity and the unpredictability of war, to bystanders this action might not make any sense, but in the context of a 5th generation warfare, it perfectly might so. If A, the goal is division or straight up chaos to seize opportunities, or for example B, it is beneficial to a not yet foreseeable long-term goal which does not follow an us versus them mentality. Fourth, strategic corruption is playing a significant role for those who can afford it, if it might be law enforcement or even intelligence turning a blind eye, or legislation nurturing one's goals, which we will come back to in the How Oligopolization Kills Innovation series. What does this all mean in easier words? Get ready for some really weird and confusing events, and seemingly unconnected domino effects, while you have to look for whom actually might profit from this or that, and what might be connected long-term ramifications and opportunities for gains. Of course, much of it can rather be explained by states seeking to increasing their control in fifth-generation warfare against actual adversaries, as in global insurgency and the future of armed conflict by Terry Tariff and Aaron and Regina Karp can be read. As can be drawn from the changing dynamics of warfare by Osama Khurshid, for example, when we see teachers pushing questionable ideologies on children, parents getting upset and the state then labeling them as terrorists, which makes the parents even more upset and brings even people who don't even have kids into the conflict. Then the social movements join and the politicians get involved. So there we might have a multi-front war churning on by its own because everyone is fighting everyone. Cui bono? Coming to point 5, non-state actors becoming primary actors, shaping narratives, conflicts, policy, and in the end, society. The defining character of the fifth generation war, which sets it apart from even the fourth generation, is the power of non-state actors, who might not even be affiliated with a cultural or ideological movement necessarily, as for example terrorist organizations are covered in the beforehand generation. In fifth generation warfare, private companies can join in without having to run an actual armed force. As Dr. Björn Herfmeister from WEMO elaborated in our first interview.
So now assume that someone, and a state actor, but the hardware becomes cheaper, so soon pretty much everybody can build a really powerful neural network. So someone builds such a network and just tells it, go out there and survive. That's my instruction to you. Now, that thing has software capability. So what will that thing do?
Which is what we are seeing today, that private interests can be clashing with those of nation-states, and they are victors to those states who don't have these interests as well aligned as others. Summarizing, especially Western states are very vulnerable to all these kinds of disruptions, and there's definitely no silver bullet on the horizon, while raising new ministries of truth harbors its own foreshadowing problems. There are so many aspects this as well as fifth generation warfare could and are taking form. If you would like to learn some examples and how to best immunize yourself against this, like, share and subscribe to not miss future episodes of this series, as next up as well as more helpful process explained, like the coming ones on the joint intelligence process and how to spot a psyop as well as psychopaths. Thank you for your attention. This concludes my elaborations. Stay vigilant, stay aware. Take care.